Good morning, everyone. My name is Vicky Ferguson. Thank you for joining us at today's webinar. I am the Unit Manager for the MHRA Medical Devices Regulatory team. And today we'll provide you with an overview of our consultation on the future regulation of medical devices in the UK, which was launched on the 16th of September. It's a chance to ask questions to clarify both what is being asked in the consultation and on how you can respond. I would like to stress this is not a forum for sharing views on what the answers to the consultation questions should be. However, we strongly encourage people to submit a response to the consultation following the webinars. This is the first of two webinars that we're running. Today's session is aimed at those in the medical devices industry. Another is being held on the 14th of October, and that will be tailored more to patients and the wider public. I would now like to introduce some of my colleagues who are presenting alongside me. Jenny Keating and Jalan Hussain from Devices Regulatory Group. Jenny, Jalan, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, my name is Jalan Hussain. I work as a Senior Regulatory Policy Manager in the Devices Regulatory Policy Group.
Hello, I'm Jenny Keating. I'm also a Senior Regulatory Policy Manager in the Devices Regulatory Group.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Before we start, I will run through some of the logistics for today's webinar. We expect the webinar to run for around 60 minutes. The material we will present will be based on the medical devices consultation that is published on the gov.uk website. We'll start today by giving an overview of the consultation, letting you know what it covers and how to respond. This should take around 30 minutes. We'll then follow with a Q&A session. You can submit questions throughout the webinar using Slido, and we'll cover how you can do this shortly. Many of you will have already submitted questions as part of your registrations for the webinar. We've grouped those by key themes and we'll answer them first. We'll then answer questions that you submit today. We will focus on questions seeking clarification on the content of the consultation and on how to respond to the consultation. If you have a question that is not being answered during the webinar, we recommend you get in touch with us using the contact details given at the bottom of this slide. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available on our gov.uk page in around 2 weeks' time. The recording will have live captioning and will not include the Q&A session to protect participants' privacy. Live captioning is not running during today's webinar. However, captioning will be included in the recorded webinar. After today's webinar, you will be sent a survey and a link to where you can find the slides and the recording of today's event. As I've mentioned, you'll be able to submit questions throughout the webinar today using Slido, anonymously if you prefer. Questions will be moderated by our team, where possible, will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Participants will be able to see and like questions that the moderators release for discussion, allowing us to focus on the most popular questions first. Please focus your questions on clarifications required to support you in responding to the consultation, as we won't be able to answer general regulatory questions or provide MHR reviews on the topics covered by the consultation, and these won't be approved by our moderator. As previously noted, if you feel at the end of the session that your question has not been answered, please do send through to the consultation mailbox shown on the slide a copy of your question. I'll now briefly run through how to use Slido. When you go to the Slido webpage, you will notice a blue box at the top of the screen. Enter the code that is shown on the screen here that is #MHRA DEV 5 OCT and press the blue arrow. This will take you to the questions page. You can then type your question in the box here and press the enter key to submit it. Our MHRA moderators will then receive your question and will review and collate submitted questions ready for the Q&A session later in the webinar. I'll now hand over to Jenny, who will cover the next section in the presentation.
Thank you, Vicky. So, as previously noted, the purpose of today's webinar is to give an overview of the Medical Devices Regulation Consultation, which launched on the 16th of September and is accessible from the gov.uk website. So, just in terms of what we'll cover, we'll start by setting out the background and context to the consultation, how we've arrived at this point and why we're planning to change our regulations. We'll then go on to highlight the overall aims of the consultation, setting out what we're trying to achieve. Following that, we'll provide a brief overview of the topics we're consulting on, and then we'll provide some practical guidance on how to access and respond to the consultation via the online survey. And in that section, we'll run through some hints and tips to support you in responding. Finally, we'll move on to the Q&A session, starting with the pre-submitted questions before moving on to address questions that have been submitted through Slido today. So this slide sets out the geographic coverage of the consultation, and we'd like to clarify here that the consultation applies to the whole of the UK, so both Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So as you may be aware, the Northern Ireland Protocol was agreed as part of the UK's departure from the EU and entered into force on the 1st of January this year. Under the protocol, Northern Ireland must continue to follow certain EU legislation, including the EU Medical Devices Regulation, which came into force on 26th of May. The EU In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Devices Regulation will take effect in Northern Ireland from May next year, and these EU regulations do not apply in Great Britain. The government is seeking a new balance to the protocol, as set out in its command paper published in July. The government has proposed a dual regulatory regime in Northern Ireland, where goods that meet either UK or EU rules could circulate within Northern Ireland. And as such, our consultation covers the whole of the UK, and we welcome views on alignment across all of the UK nations as part of this consultation. Okay, so this slide provides an overview of how devices are currently regulated. And regarding the legislation that currently applies, so as just noted, the EU MDR and EU IVDR will be implemented in Northern Ireland, but won't apply in Great Britain. And so the UK medical devices regulations continue to govern medical devices placed on the Great Britain market. In terms of conformity marking, currently, if you are placing a device on the Great Britain market, it can bear either a UKCA marking, a CE marking, or both. And CE marking on medical devices will be recognised in Great Britain until 30th of June 2023. And from then 1st of July 2023, a UKCA mark will be needed for Great Britain. If you're placing a medical device on the Northern Ireland market, it currently needs to have a CE marking. So turning to our ability to change medical device regulations in future, so the Medicines and Medical Devices Act has introduced powers to amend our medical devices regime. So we now have an opportunity to develop a more robust future regime for medical devices. So this really is a pivotal point for medical device regulation in the UK, and with fast-paced developments in health tech and lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that how devices are regulated can make a big difference for patients, developers, and the wider public. So that brings me on to the aims of this consultation. So as previously mentioned, we now have an opportunity to create a world-leading regime that prioritises patient safety while fostering innovation, including the streamlining the approval of medical devices. We know that this can have a real impact on people's lives, and we all want to be able to trust that the medical devices we access and use are safe and effective. We want to ensure that all devices have the right level of scrutiny and that we can effectively and swiftly identify and respond to an issue with the device if it does arise. So we want to see a regime that helps ensure patient safety, not only the safety of those using a device, but also wider public health, which we all have an interest in. And we want to ensure that the UK remains an attractive destination for researching, manufacturing and supplying medical devices. We're also mindful of the need for international collaboration and want to ensure that we take account of best practice. And finally, we want to see a regime that is more open and transparent and has patients at its heart while being flexible and responsive to innovation, and also proportionate with devices being subject to scrutiny relative to the level of the risk that they pose, while not unduly deterring device developers with compliance costs. So I'll now just move on to talk about timescales. So the consultation is a key step in our work to develop a more robust regime for medical devices. It follows recent reviews which have highlighted how problems with devices such as surgical mesh can have a significant impact on people's lives. It also follows on from early informal discussions that we held this year with a range of different stakeholders, from patients and trade associations to approved bodies and clinicians, to inform our early thinking on where the opportunities might lie. In terms of next steps, the consultation will close on the 25th of November, and we encourage as many people as possible to respond. We will be analysing responses throughout this year with a review to publishing a government response early next year and laying regulations for a future regime to come into force from July 2023. So those are our key aims, and now that we've covered the background to the consultation, I'll hand over to Jelan, who will talk you through the topics covered and how to respond.
Thank you, Jenny. Over the next few slides, I will provide a high-level overview of the consultation chapters. The consultation is split into 17 chapters, and you can complete a response to the consultation via the online survey. Before beginning the survey, you will have the opportunity to select chapters you would like to respond to. Please note that you can select multiple chapters. So, for example, if your key interest is in approved bodies and conformity assessments, you can select chapters 5 and 6 and only see questions relevant to your selected topics. There is a summary of each chapter on the gov.uk website to help you determine which chapters are relevant to you, and I'll quickly run through them now. Chapter 1 covers the scope of our regulations, for example, expanding the scope of the products captured within the definition of a medical device and in vitro diagnostic. This chapter also explores expanding the scope of the medical device regulations to products without an intended medical purpose that have a similar functioning and risk profiles to medical devices, so for example, your cosmetic contact lenses. Chapter 2 covers the classification of medical devices and considers how the current classification rules could be updated to better align with international best practice. This includes changing the categorization of certain devices, for example, moving all implantable devices and their accessories to Class 3. Chapter 3 covers the economic operators and how more specific regulations could improve patient safety by strengthening the accountability of manufacturers, importers, and distributors within the medical device supply chain. Chapter 4 covers the registration of devices, and this specifically, and looking at specifically the introduction of unique device identifiers to improve traceability throughout the life cycle of a device. This chapter also considers the use of a single UK database for market surveillance and transparency. Chapter 5 covers requirements for UK approved bodies who assess whether high-risk medical devices meet the regulatory requirements. It sets out more detailed requirements for approved bodies to drive improvements in their operation. And then moving on to Chapter 6 covers the need for greater transparency and consistency within the conformity assessment process. In particular, this chapter is focused on ensuring that conformity assessments consistently, robustly, and effectively assess medical devices to ensure their safety, quality, and performance. And then Chapter 7 covers clinical investigations and performance studies. This looks at the way manufacturers collect, analyze, and assess the clinical data relevant to a medical device in order to verify its safety and performance, and also looks at tightening requirements in a number of areas in order to help improve patient safety. Chapter 8 covers market surveillance, vigilance, and market surveillance. And it seeks to explore how requirements placed on manufacturers could be expanded and clarified, for example, by introducing post-market surveillance plans, which would outline how information is to be collected and assessed. So the next set of chapters are product specific, and I'll give a quick summary of those. Chapter 9 covers IVDs and looks at a range of methods improving patient safety, such as amending the IVD classification, changes to genetic testing requirements. Chapter 10 covers the use of software and artificial intelligence, or AI, as medical devices. The current regulation does not reflect the increasing use of software and AI within healthcare, and so this chapter seeks to gain feedback on a number of issues, such as defining software in our legislative risk categorization frameworks and the digital yellow card scheme. Chapter 11 covers implantable devices, which are often associated with invasive procedures, long-term use, and complex removal procedures, making them high-risk products. This chapter considers this chapter considers expanding the scope of regulation to include temporarily implanted devices, up-classifying certain implantable devices, and the introduction of more controlled access policies for implantables. Chapter 12 covers the product-specific changes, such as the remanufacturing of single-use devices and regulation of kits. This chapter also covers requirements for custom-made devices, including technical documentation and post-market surveillance. Next slide, please, Lizzie. The next set of chapters cover more cross-cutting themes. So chapter 13 covers environmental sustainability and public health impacts to explore how a future regime for medical devices could help drive more environmentally sustainable practices in manufacturing, usage, and disposal. Chapter 14 covers alternative routes to market, which could give manufacturers with a medical device single audit program, certificate, or approval from other certain international regulators opportunities to access new routes to the UK market in order to enhance supply of medical devices coming into the UK. Chapter 15 looks at transitional arrangements and considers how we might implement all of these changes smoothly and how we can support manufacturers as they move across the new future medical devices system. Chapter 16 is an opportunity to provide feedback on the consultation and process, and will be valuable in shaping how the remainder of this consultation and future consultations are delivered. And finally, we have chapter 17. This is an important chapter aimed at members of the public and end users of medical devices, as well as people who may have lower levels of technical expertise or less time to respond to the survey. We appreciate that the consultation is quite lengthy and technical, so if you are pressed for time, we encourage you to complete chapter 17. It has questions on all areas of the consultation other than conformity assessment, as this is a highly technical area. So that was an overview of the key topics. I appreciate I did rush through them quite quickly, but I hope that's provided you with quite a high-level overview. It is also important to be clear on what is not covered in this consultation. Some key exclusions to note are changes to MHRA's operational processes. Designated standards are also outside of the scope of this consultation, but will be an important consideration as the future regime develops. Common specifications setting out technical or clinical requirements a device must meet. So we do not have the regulatory powers to make separate regulations to create common specifications. However, such requirements could be detailed in regulations themselves or in schedules dealing with specific device types. Other areas excluded within this consultation include medicines, expert panels, reference laboratories, and medical device coordination groups. Next slide, please. I will now briefly cover how to respond to the consultation. The consultation is hosted by Social Optics through their online platform. Just to note, when you click the link on the gov.uk landing page, it will take you through to their external site to complete the survey. If you prefer to read through the questions as a whole before responding to the survey, you can download a copy of each chapter from the gov.uk landing page. When you are ready to move through the Social Optic platform, you will initially be asked to provide some information about you or your organisation. If there are any questions that you do not wish to answer, there is a prefer not to say option. Following this, you will be shown a list of chapters. Here you can select all the chapters you would like to offer a response on, and then click Next. You will then be presented with each selected chapter in turn, showing background information and corresponding questions. You do not have to answer all questions if they do not apply to you. Each time you click Next at the end of a page, your response to consultation so far will be saved. If you wish to take a break and return to the consultation, you can do this by copying the URL address in your browser. You can then use that address to pick up where you left off. You can do this as many times as you need until you press Submit at the end of the consultation. When you press Submit, your response will be closed and submitted to the MHRA. When answering the consultation, you will see 4 options at the bottom of your screen, which are circled here on the slide. Once you have entered your personal details and selected your chapters, you can move between chapters and review your answers at any time by clicking Show All Sections. You can also access the overview of contents, glossary, and appendix from these links. Once you have clicked Show All Sections, you will see a list of all of the sections you've selected to respond to. From there, you can click into any chapter and answer or edit previous answers. If you'd like to respond to additional sections at any point, you can do this by returning to the areas of the consultation page and navigating from there. Just to be sure to click Next at the bottom of the page before moving onto another section to ensure your answers are saved. If you wish to edit any of the responses you have given, you can do this at any time before you press Submit. So before we move on to the Q&A section, I would like to recap on key next steps. The consultation will remain live until 11:45 p.m. on the 25th of November. Once we have received all of the data, our team will review, collate, and analyse responses and summarise the findings. We will publish a government response to the consultation, and we will reflect these findings in our work to develop secondary legislation and then update our regulations.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and to highlight one final time, the consultation is now live and can be found on the gov.uk website. You can find a link to the consultation on the Eventbrite pages where you registered for today's event, and the consultation closes at 11:45 p.m. on the 25th of November 2021. If you have any further questions which haven't been answered today, please send those over to the mailbox with the email address outlined here on the bottom line. You can also find this address on the gov.uk pages for the consultation. On behalf of all our presenters and all of those of you who asked questions, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you. Bye.